Hello, I'm Professor Patrick McGorry. Welcome to today's webinar. Before we proceed, as Executive Director of Orygen, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we work around Australia and pay my respects to elders both past and present.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Kerry Gibson. I'm an Associate Professor at the University of Auckland in the School of Psychology, and I'm going to be talking to you today about what young people want from digital support, and also a little bit about what it is that you might be able to do to use some of these exciting opportunities to reach young people in distress. So I think we all know that there's quite a lot of challenges we face in kind of engaging young people with the support that we offer to them. We know that although that young people have the highest rates of mental health problems, very few of them actually make use of formal services. In fact, we think something like less than 20% of them will actually go and see a psychologist or a counsellor when they need to. So there are quite a wide range of reasons why young people are reluctant to make use of sort of formal professional services, but we think it's about things like stigma associated with mental health problems, a tendency to kind of be self-reliant and autonomous, being concerned that other people will take away their control. And also it's to do with inaccessible and sometimes inappropriately designed services for young people. So we tend to talk about something called a service gap, which is a kind of a gap between what we provide as professionals, as services, and what it is that young people might want. And I think most of us who work in the youth mental health field will acknowledge that we really do need to find some new ways of reaching young people who are in distress. So I think a lot of us are getting very excited about the potential for digital support to be part of the way that we engage with young people. And I think some of us are very excited about it. Some of us are probably a little bit intimidated by it. But I think it's got great potential to help us reach this hard to engage group. But if we want to make the most of it, we really need to sort of understand a little bit better about how young people operate with digital communication. We talk about this generation of young people as digital natives, people who've grown up with digital communication as just part of their natural world and are very familiar with it and use it in particular kinds of ways. So what I'm interested in is what it is that makes digital support so attractive to young people, and also how they're using it. And if we can know all of that, we might be in a better position to see how we can use it to reach them better. So in this talk today, I'm drawing from my research, which comes out of a project called the Mirror Project. It's a project that's been running for a few years, in which I've been really interested to find out how this generation of young people are experiencing mental health problems, what it is that where they go for help, and how they experience the kinds of services that we provide to them. My idea here is that we haven't heard enough from young people about, their own world, and sometimes when we imagine what young people might want, we think back to our own youth or adolescence, and we think, oh, that's the way we used to do it then. But of course, things are very different, and being young today is very different to what it was certainly when I was a young woman. So I've been interviewing, together with my students and some of my colleagues, we've interviewed about 180 people so far, and it's ongoing. The young people are aged between 13 and 22, and this project is based in New Zealand. Now, in fairness, not all of the project has focused on digital communication in particular, and some of it is just about general services like counselling and so on, and you can read more about it if you go to the website of the Mirror Project. But as I spoke to young people, it became clear to me that digital communication was a really big part of what they envisaged as being a part of their kind of support network, if you like. And we did interview some people specifically who'd used a text counselling service which was offered by Youthline. We've also interviewed people specifically about how they've used social media to look for support. But even in the other projects, the digital communication was coming up again and again, and that's what kind of drew me to this particular area of work. So what I'm going to be talking about today is just a few of the themes that have come out of the research so far, to try and give you a sense of what it is that young people are getting from digital support, or what it is that they'd like to get from digital support. And I'm going to look at a range of themes, and I'm going to give you some examples just to kind of bring it alive a bit so that you can get a sense of what the young people said about what they were wanting themselves. So, young people want support online which is accessible and immediate. That's one of the big advantages of digital support for young people. And if you think about it, lots of our services are set up to, say, give somebody a therapy session on a Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock next week, and requires that the young person wait until then to talk about something that's troubling them. But of course, young people are operating in a very different world now. They're operating in a world where they have 24-hour access to communication and information via the internet or other forms of text communication. And so they what's become important for them is to be able to access some kind of support in the very moment that they need it. So this young person talks about how she got some support from the text counselling service. She says, I was on the school bus and I was sort of listening to people mocking me, and I was like, okay. I sort of typed up my situation. I said, can anyone help? And they sort of wanted to know in more detail sort of what was going on and how I was feeling. And they sort of helped give me an idea of how to relax and ignore the people. So literally, as this young woman was sitting on the bus experiencing bullying, she was able to text for help to a counselling service, and obviously that gave her advice, but also that sense of kind of knowing somebody was there with her in this awful situation. And one young person sort of captured it. She said, text counselling is not like every so often, it's just like whenever you need it. It's not like on a Tuesday afternoon, it's whenever you want it. Young people also emphasised how important control was for them. Now, if we think about it, many of the services we offer involve the young person kind of giving up control to somebody else. So often what happens is somebody notices they're quiet in class or seem to be struggling. Their teacher might suggest they go see the school counsellor, who tells them to come back several times, and then they might contact their parents and suggest they go into a mental health service. Now, from the young people we've spoken to, that makes it very hard for them to engage. They feel like they've lost control of the situation before it even starts. And one of the issues with a kind of counselling situation for young people is, once they're in it, they don't have a lot of choice about how it's going to happen. Even if it's sort of interactive and collaborative, they're expected to continue for 12 sessions, and they find it very hard to kind of say, no, I don't feel like this anymore. So quite a few of them were talking about how nice it was to be able to text and say, like this one says, so I just like texting, and like I can open up when I'm texting and I'll be like, okay, I need to close the door now. So that sense of, you can talk when you want to talk, and when you've had enough, you can say, look, I've had enough. And this other quote next to it is a young person who says, you don't have to go on and on talking, and now we'll be finished in 2 minutes. So something about that quick, you can do it and be done with it. And yes, of course, that kind of allows them to pace it for themselves, to take as much or as little as they want, and to stop it when they choose. Another thing that young people really valued was privacy, and in particular privacy in relation to their parents. Now, this can be a tricky area, because I know a lot of people feel that families should be involved, and certainly that's very important at times. But what we heard from the young people was that sometimes having your parents know about stuff was the very last thing you wanted, and there were a lot of reasons for that. Sometimes it was about that the problems actually involved their parents. They were having difficulties with their parents. Sometimes they were doing things that they thought their parents might disapprove of. And quite a lot of the time they just said they felt simply awkward with their parents knowing that much about their difficulties. So for the young people, being able to text or communicate online was really a nice private way of being able to communicate about things that felt sensitive. So this young person, for example, says, I kind of thought texting was a lot easier just because mum and dad were at home and I didn't want them to hear me talking on the phone because they'd get curious as to who I was talking to. So I thought texting was sort of a bit safer. She was comparing it there to telephone counselling even. And this other young person says, no, because I was in my bedroom and my parents were asleep, and if they'd heard me talking about it, I would kind of be in a bit of trouble. If I get a call late at night from anyone, even if it's my best friend, I'll get in trouble. Why are you getting a call so late at night? Obviously, her parents would ask that. And so being able to text, and some of them they were sitting in the lounge while their parents were there with a blanket over their knees, texting for support, or in their beds late at night while their parents thought they were asleep. And having that kind of private space to be able to ask for help was really important for them. Not all kind of online communication is anonymous, but quite a lot of it can be. And even when it's not anonymous, I think young people feel like there's a degree of kind of distance that almost can feel like anonymity. Somebody was just telling me today that being able to communicate on social media, she did use her kind of her online name, but she felt that wasn't her exact name, so it gave her a bit of protection. And what young people like about the anonymity is that it seems to protect them from fears that they might be judged, and young people particularly sensitive to being judged, particularly by adults who might look at them and kind of think that they're making bad choices, or that they're crazy, or that they're immature. So quite a few young people said things like this. I kind of thought that maybe because they seemed like the only person I could talk to because they didn't know me and they didn't know where I came from and what things have happened in my life. So that made it easier for her to talk. And this other young person says it's definitely easier to stay stuffed behind a screen, and when you can't actually see what the person thinks, like you can't see them reacting to what you're telling them, you can only read their words. And of course the reaction they fear is a reaction of social judgment. Young people spoke a lot about how texting or communicating through digital communication just felt more comfortable for them. I mean, it's quite hard to pin this one down, but they spoke a lot about it. It's just not so awkward. It's not so embarrassing. It's more comfortable for us. So this young person, for example, says, I think it is, not having to see them face to face. It's not as embarrassing, I think, as well. Well, I find it embarrassing talking face to face about my problems because I sort of don't know how to act or move around like. And this, in fact, I remember this interview. This was a young woman who was clearly very shy and found it quite awkward talking to me. This was an interview I did face to face. And I could just see how hard it would be to sit in front of an adult counsellor, perhaps, and to open up about something extremely sensitive. And so just to have that little bit of distance behind the screen made it easier for her. I was interviewing a young man, a 17-year-old young man, who was talking about how he used Reddit as a place to find support from his peers. And he said, well, maybe it's to do with the ability to say what you need to without showing emotion. For example, you couldn't tell if I was crying or the like. And that seemed to me particularly poignant in the moment because I had a sense that he was talking about very sad things as he spoke to me and that he might well be crying. But for a young man, and we did have a bit of a conversation about this, for young men, it may be especially hard to kind of fear that you would lose control or show some feelings that you didn't want to show in front of somebody. So it's just a little bit of safety in that online relationship. Now, young people also said they just wanted a space to talk, or as it turns out, to text. So much of our services have been designed around kind of particular intervention strategies that we focus on. But in fact, many of the young people, and not just in relation to the digital communication, but across all areas, told me that the thing that they found most helpful about different kinds of support was the opportunity to kind of express themselves, to have a chance to say how they felt. I just want to talk, or I want to text. So this young person says that, in fact, most of them, when they spoke about texting, it was just the same as talking for them, and most of them used the word talk when they meant text, and I'd often interrupt them and say, are you meaning talk as in the person sitting there, or are you saying texting as in writing? And they'd say, oh yeah, no, I meant text. So this young person says, I think it's just because my generation is used to texting and it's easier for us and more convenient, and it feels like it's just the same as talking. Some young people told me about how they prefer to sit next to each other and text each other because that's kind of feels like a comfortable way of talking. And this other quote talks about somebody finding it kind of helpful to be able to write things down through text. Like, I found it easier in writing stuff down. Yeah, I feel more secure. I don't know why, but it's just because you can see the words that you're writing in text, and you have time to process everything. So you can think about what you're going to say. In face-to-face counselling, you have to think really fast, and this idea has come up a lot actually, and it makes sense if you think about it, that young people having to kind of marshal their thoughts and communicate effectively is really difficult when they're in perhaps what is a slightly intimidating situation for them. And we know, for example, from research that it's very hard. Young people, one of the things that stops young people seeking help for suicide is that they don't quite know how to say it. So this opportunity to kind of think something through, to put it down, and to have a chance to say what you want to say without having to kind of gabble and gasp and get it across in this difficult kind of formal situation. Interestingly enough, there's been a lot of talk about how the advent of digital communication has meant a loss of connection between people. So we talk about, we make jokes about the zombie apocalypse. Young people are just attached to their phones. They no longer want, real, genuine connections. But I found quite the opposite in my research. Not only are young people very interested in making connections with others, and, that feels like one of the most important parts of their support seeking, one of the most important things that they're looking for. But it didn't just apply to face-to-face interactions. It was just as present in what it is that they wanted from digital interactions. So one young person talking about how she would call Text Youth Line when she was distressed, she said, yeah, they're there. Because when my mum is in hospital and my dad's at work and my brother's irritating me, I feel like there's no one I can go to for help. And then you text them and I feel like I'm not by myself. So that sense of somebody being there. And what was really interesting with the Youth Line text service, often, always, they didn't know the name of the counsellor. The counselling was anonymous, and also they may not have the same counsellor each time. But nonetheless, the young people seemed to feel like that there was a connection with somebody in this broad organisation. One young person said, I feel like Youthline is my guardian angel, in a way, kind of somebody that watches over you, that you could contact if you were alone or distressed. And even, outside of the sort of formal services of a text counselling service, young people spoke about how important online connection was for them in their peer groups, where a lot of them are involved in helping each other. Online connection, this person says, it really does help. It does help. It's kind of like that boost you actually needed to know that even if they don't know you personally, someone out there cares that you're alive. And certainly in most of the work that I've been doing, looking at young people looking for support in social media, they're talking about this feeling that somebody cared enough to say something to them. Somebody left them a little heart emoji, somebody said hi, somebody said, are you okay? And it's that feeling, it's not advice, it's not anything like that, it's that feeling that somebody is there for you. And it's a real relationship. Now that may surprise some of us, who would be, I guess I'm thinking back to my own training as a clinical psychologist and how important the relationship is in therapy, and it's the cornerstone of everything. And when I started to think about sort of digital communication and kind of giving support via that, one of my biggest concerns was that somehow we would lose the relationship, this developing relationship. But what was interesting for me is how much young people found relationships online, that relationships weren't about the technology, they were about the people on the other end of the technology. They were just a way of accessing other people. And that they experienced, even sometimes with people who were anonymous, they experienced a sense that there was a real person there that they were getting to know over a period of time and came to trust. So this young person says, for example, they were like my friends, like how they would get worried with you, so they text you back right away. It made me feel that way. Another person sort of similarly said, I put down the phone, I felt like I was kind of losing a friendship. This one says, instead of like some random person, it's just kind of like sometimes the texts that come through kind of reminds me of one of my friends. Sometimes it's just like, oh, it just sounds like someone I know who said that. It's almost as though even when they don't have enough kind of contextual information to know who this person is, they can almost insert it into their previous experience of good relationships and kind of allow that to colour and give a kind of a warmth and texture to the relationship they're having. Now, the last quote on this page is really an interesting one because it comes from a situation in which a young woman was talking about how she had used text counselling service at a time when she was really struggling. She was caught in this kind of conflict. She was busy writing exams and her mum wanted her to stay at home and study and her boyfriend wanted to go out, and she was kind of torn between them, so she'd really fallen out with both of them. And so she texted somebody at the Youth Line counselling service, and I asked her after a while, I said, who were you talking to, do you think? And she said, well, something made me feel like it was a guy. Now, of course, you have to remember this is anonymous. Something made it feel like it was a guy. Yeah, he actually seemed like he cared. Yeah, it was sort of. So I think that's why it felt like it was my boyfriend, because even though my boyfriend didn't want to talk to me, this person seemed like what I wanted my boyfriend to be doing. So with no contextual information, she had imagined that the person, the counsellor on the other end of the phone, could be a bit like her boyfriend, except he would be rather more understanding of her situation. Interestingly, the next day she continued her text counselling conversation with another counsellor, and I asked her what that person was like, and she guessed that she was probably an older woman about the same age as her mother. So she literally sort of imagined the people she would have liked to talk to, and of course this is a great strength of digital communication. I mean, we know this from online dating, that people can imagine somebody to be wonderful. Of course, that can all go wrong when you meet them in real life, and they're not at all like they seemed when you were chatting on the online dating service. But fortunately, with sort of online resources, well, some of them anyway, you don't have to meet the person. And so it's almost like you can imagine the best relationship for you, the relationship that would help you open up. And that's a really important thing for young people. So I think that there are some real strong advantages of digital support for young people, and hopefully you could see that from the examples that I gave and from the way that young people themselves are talking about. It's accessible and immediate, and it kind of fits with a generation of people who are used to something happening now, to getting what they need now. It allows young people greater control over their access and pace of engagement. So, for example, they can decide when they want to go online to look for support. They can decide when they want to stop. And they can decide when they want to go back, and that's a really important thing, because I think sometimes our therapies, which require sort of a 12-session commitment, which then ends, may not be the best fit for young people who might prefer to move in and out of something when and if they need it. It also creates great opportunities for young people to be able to express themselves. And, as much as we think we create spaces as adults for young people to talk, and obviously we would all be very alert to that and the importance of that, but just by virtue of the power that we have and the lack of power that they have, we're adults, we're professionals, it's sometimes very hard for young people to kind of formulate their thoughts and then come to know what it is that they think. And so digital communication is really a great opportunity for them to be able to do that. Um, and of course, lastly, as you could hear from the last few examples that I gave, this is not technology. This is a relationship. Digital communication allows young people to establish a sense of relationship, connection, and a relationship to develop. And we know that that is one of the most important parts of any process of kind of benefiting from support, and also increases the likelihood that they may then engage with other kinds of therapy at a later stage, because we know that a good experience of some engagement leads to a greater likelihood of later engagement. Of course, there are some challenges with getting into this whole area of digital support, and I have a sense of them myself because this was new to me, and I wasn't a convert when I first started doing this research. But certainly there are a lot of negative associations that we've heard about with digital technology. We've heard a lot about bullying, about attention seeking, about kind of young people getting preoccupied with how they present themselves on social media. We've heard about all sorts of problematic things. But I think that sometimes that can blind us to some of the positive things that digital communication can also offer. Research is more and more kind of pointing towards the possibilities here, and I think, like all forms of interaction, if you kind of, any relationship has the potential to do harm, but it also has the potential to do good, and we need to be aware of both of those. There are some valid concerns about ethics and risk issues. I think clinicians feel that sometimes, particularly, I can speak for clinical psychologists, but other groups have their own set of professional ethics, and we're concerned about things like, can we manage risk in this situation? If this young person said they want to harm themselves, how would we go about managing it in a safe way? Do I have enough information to help me make the judgments I need to hear? Can I keep this information private? What does it mean to be working, in this kind of internet space? So those are all valid concerns, and we do need more work in those areas. But having said that, there is quite a lot of research out there about this stuff. So I think we're not working completely without guidance here. I think probably one of the things that really holds people back with kind of exploring the potential of digital support, though, is their feeling of kind of not having the skills and knowledge to do it. And I think, that's a very understandable feeling. We're moving into a different terrain. Many of us have been taught to talk to people face to face, to engage that way. And this is new territory, so I think we really need to do some targeted training for professionals in this area so that they can get more comfortable knowing the possibilities, just even how to text in a youth-friendly way online, and to show support and compassion for somebody using text, would be really important. So just a few starting ideas for clinicians out there. I mean, some of you may be concerned that, you haven't got the kind of technology, the equipment that would sort of make this possible for you. But I think it is possible to kind of just bring elements of this into, whatever setting you're working in. So, for example, you might think of using digital technology to build the relationship with a young client in the early stages. So one of the things we know from my research, for example, is that young people often come to that first session, particularly in, say, a mental health service, feeling very anxious about what to expect and so on, and, kind of often with a prototype that it's going to look something like, going to see the headmaster or, their doctor. So one way of using digital technology might be to communicate with young people via text prior to their appointment, to see if they've got some questions, chat backwards and forwards, set a little informal tone so they feel like they get a bit of a sense of you, allow them some space to ask some questions that they may not be able to face. And you could just use your ordinary mobile phone to do that, or you could get a special phone for clients and you could do it off there. I think digital support could also be really helpful to bridge the gap between sessions or when clients are on a waiting list. So, anytime that clients feel like they are kind of out of touch or can't get hold of the support that they need. And, there's some research actually that suggests that just kind of being linked into a digital app or linked to your service can make you feel like at least they're watching out for me, at least they really are there. So it may only be sort of some minimal digital involvement, whether email, although email's not preferable for young people, text would be better, or some other sort of online communication. You could also use digital technology to facilitate client expression in sessions and between sessions. As I said, young people struggle to communicate, and particularly around sensitive issues, and they may appreciate the opportunity to go away and use some of the online journaling apps that can allow them to kind of write down some of what they're feeling, can bring it back in and talk with you about it. Similarly with the apps, a lot of people get very excited about apps. Apps have some advantages in and of themselves, for example, like teaching you mindfulness or monitoring your mood and so on. But actually, it might be more important that app gives you a sense of connection to your counsellor, and also a way of communicating with them. So if you, for example, were monitoring your mood during the week, you could bring in your app and you could sit with your counsellor and go, look, this is how I was feeling, and that's how my mood went up and down. And that can become a part of helping you to get to say what you want to say. I think in general, though, it's also important to just acknowledge that this is a part of young people's lives. And I think, one of the questions we often ask when we're doing an assessment of somebody's strengths, we may ask them about the supports they have available. And we ask them about their family, their friends. And I don't know how many of us actually acknowledge the importance of digital networks as part of young people's support. And, from the research I've been doing, particularly in my most recent project looking at online support, peer support, young people make enormous use of forums and social media to get support, to talk about how they're feeling, to share with people who've had similar experiences. So I think if we just kept an open mind and asked about these things, there may be opportunities for us to kind of build on existing support, but also sometimes perhaps to guide and talk through with clients ways in which some things can be risky online, because some of the young people told me that they had found some wonderful supportive online groups, but they often had some quite difficult experiences finding them along the way, and particularly for younger people who may not know how to find safe online groups for themselves. And then I would say it's important for us as professionals just to start to develop our skills in using digital technology. I think many of us probably already use Facebook, as the young people would tell us this is the one that older people use. But even there, you're messaging, you've got a way of communicating, you can work out whether the person on the other end of your messenger is responding in a good way. So we should kind of practice with it, and then also maybe where necessary, organise some trainings for our practices and services and so on. And just some broad ideas for services. I think there's huge potential in digital communication. This doesn't have to detract from any of the services you currently offer, face-to-face services, but to make this one of the options in the suite of services that you offer to young people. I think to look particularly at the accessibility of that service, so that it's available when young people might need it. I mean, this is obviously wishful thinking, but if I could choose, I would want those services to be available 24 hours, because sometimes the times that young people struggle the most are in the dark hours of the night when their friends aren't awake. I create spaces so that young people can choose whether and when they want to use digital services, so that they can sort of tap into those and also exit from them as they choose. Make some options there so they're not just sort of digital interventions that provide, kind of give young people advice or tell them what to do or where to go, but really make a space for them to express themselves and preferably be listened to. And remember, it's not just about the technology. I think many of us have got excited about all the apps and computer games that seem like they will, help people with their mental health problems. But really what my research says is that the technology works to create opportunities for connection. So it's the people that use the technology that are really important here. So I just want to acknowledge all the wonderful young people that I spoke to in developing this research, and also some of my colleagues at the University of Auckland. And there have been a number of students, some of our doctoral clinical psychology students, who've contributed to this research. And there are a number of student theses as well that have come out of this body of work so far, and a few publications that you could have a look at if you want to read further. Most of these deal with broader young people's priorities for kind of broader support rather than just digital support, but give you an idea. Thank you very much.